This is a certified hood classic.
Reconstruction was on the last period, all right? So we won't have questions related to that. As I've been saying all along, we're looking at some overlapping time periods here. Period 6 will primarily look at the development of the Northeast, the rise of industry, the growth of cities, urbanization, industrialization. And it also looks to some extent at the West, the Midwest, especially the settlement of the West, as well as the development of farmers and agrarian technological advances, large-scale production methods, and the opening of new markets for rise of industrial capital in the United States. So what are we going to think about with this? Technological advances, hopefully some things pop right into your head. Things like the Pasteur process, development of electricity with Thomas Edison, refrigeration starting to develop. Large-scale production methods. We're going to start to see national businesses with ideas of vertical consolidation, horizontal consolidation, and across schools, right? New markets will start to seek not only expansion within the United States, but also overseas. And of course, this industrial capitalism, individuals achieve great success, and generally speaking, the government will follow one economic policy. Laissez-faire, not really engaged in any regulations, but certainly not any regulations that might be seen as detrimental to the growth of businesses. Right? So, large-scale industrial production, accompanied by massive technological change, expanding international communication. With that, of course, we can think about the rise of the telegraph, the transatlantic cable. All right. So, other actions that we might think of as leading to the development of industry at this time. Certainly we can think of the Pacific Railway Act. Of course, the Pacific Railway Act 1862 would allow the federal government to provide railroad companies with land grants, subsidies. This certainly promotes the development of trans-continental railroads. Telegraph, allowing faster communication with giving way to the rise of the telephone. Again, these two will allow our businesses to become national makers, communicating quickly. See the government promote the development of agriculture and farming, the Homestead Act, by free land, willing to farm it for 5 years. And this topic of protectionism, right? As we develop our industry in America, Britain will be ahead of us in terms of industrialization by placing tariffs on foreign goods, makes you more likely to buy American, because arguably the American-made domestic product will be cheaper. Not to pay that tax. That's why we call it protectionism. We are engaged in protection of our industry. Even when arguably the greatest steel company in the world, they are still going to receive some of those benefits. Please don't question that role of government in industry. New technologies. The Pasteur process, Carnegie's doing on this idea, faster way of producing steel. As I said in class, think about all the different businesses that will build off of that, right? As it becomes cheaper to lay railroad tracks, skyscrapers, all stemming back to technological change. My life is the rise in energy, spurring off of that. Similar things when you see the federal process, where electricity started to slowly move its way. It's not going to happen overnight, but these things are going to expand. Refrigeration. Just think, one of the developments of the West. When we think of the West, what group do we think of? Well, sure, Native Americans. Similar to a buffalo cow. Alright, these are cowboys. Alright, what do the cowboys do? They bring their cows to market. When they get to market, the cows are going to be what? Water. eventually do what? Go down, all right? You're making more of something, you could sell it for cheaper, still make a profit. And this is also one of the reasons why we see that rising standard of living, all right? Because goods are becoming cheaper, people can possess more things. All right, new business organizations and methods.
David Wingate, please report to N310. David Wingate, please report
He's going to be
to
all in that too.
N310.
All right. New business organizations and methods. Think of vertical consolidation. Who do we oftentimes associate with that? Andrew Carnegie, very good. Of course, vertical consolidation would involve owning every step from raw material to finished product. All right. Think Carnegie Steel. You'll need the coke fields, the iron mines, the refineries, transportation. As you purchase each step, you're removing someone who had been making a profit of you, able to cut your costs. By cutting your costs, you can undersell your competitors, put them out of business, and develop a dominance in a particular field. All right, so Carnegie is oftentimes the example used of that. Horizontal consolidation, or horizontal integration as it's sometimes called, is the idea of dominating a particular step. All right, John D. Rockefeller, for example, dominating the oil refining business, right, turning oil into kerosene. Over 90% of the oil refineries in America owned by John D. Rockefeller. Now, of course, one of the things that will give Rockefeller an advantage over time is what will he gain from railroads that other people do not get? Discounts, those rebates, all right, that allow him also to undersell his competitors. As he undersells his competitors, as their businesses become weaker, he'll suggest that they essentially sell their business to him, all right? Let's say he has a competitor, he'll say, you could become part of the Standard Oil empire as I form my trust. You'll give up your stock to me, you'll become part of Standard Oil, and we will become consolidated. All right, the whole purpose of forming things like trusts, monopolies, pools, is you're trying to avoid what? Competition. Okay, and if you're a business, you don't want to compete. It's going to lead you to either lower your prices or provide a better product, things that might cost you money. If you have no competition, certainly you don't have to worry about lowering your prices or other such actions that might hurt your profits. All right, so a trust would be that attempt to consolidate several separate businesses under one single head, and that would allow you to avoid competition. Railroads will pioneer the use of pools, where you simply meet with your competitors and agree not to compete against them. All right, agree that you can dominate that area, I'll dominate this area, we won't directly compete. All right. Now, as goods are becoming cheaper, and as our methods of transportation expand, we will see the rise of consumerism in America. This is something we really didn't get to talk about. To be honest, it's not going to be on your test tomorrow, but certainly this might be something that you think about in our future when we think about the end of the year. The rise of consumerism, as goods become cheaper, people want stuff. All right, that's one of the reasons why we'll have that internal migration. People say, I'm getting tired of living in the farm. I want to go to the big city where I can get some more goods. All right. So we'll see companies like Sears Roebuck Company or Macy's that will provide consumers with these desired goods. As we said before, we will have that rising standard of living. As goods become cheaper, we will see that expansion of the middle class as well, as you will need, middle management, accountants, even women taking on roles of clerical support, moving into other fields, nursing, teaching. We will see that rising middle class. That being said, we will continue to see severe wealth inequality. All right, some people will be extremely wealthy. Again, think your J.P. Morgans, your Carnegies, your Vanderbilts, your Rockefellers. Even as the middle class grows, these people growing even faster, giving rise to this term that we frequently use, the Gilded Age. While we saw that term coined by Mark Twain describing primarily politics, it's oftentimes used to describe this time period in general because you will have that outer layer of gold, those people who have that extreme wealth, while beneath that will have some extreme poverty. Andrew Carnegie, again, as we said, makes a great deal of his money in steel, practices vertical consolidation. That being said, what strike is his business associated with? Homestead Steel Strike, where his underling, Henry Clay Frick, would hire what group? The Pinkertons, all right, using violence against these strikers, all right. In that sense, the use of violence against those attempting to unionize, he might be considered a robber baron. All right. On the other hand, of course, something we absolutely should jot down about Carnegie is he will publish something called the Gospel of Wealth. All right. You got to remember that Gospel of Wealth.
By Carnegie?
That's Carnegie. The Gospel of Wealth would say, yes, make money. However, before you die, you should do what?
Give it.
Use it for the public good. Don't just give it away willy-nilly, but you have a trust of the people that you should
Invest.
use it for the best purposes, all right, that will benefit all. Of course, Carnegie is associated with constructing libraries, institutions of higher learning, and other foundations. All right. Now, while we think about Andrew Carnegie, he would also be a strong advocate of what other idea based upon competition? Social Darwinism, very good. Carnegie and other industrialists using that idea of social Darwinism to justify some of their actions. You look at a society, someone has great wealth, someone's living under a bridge poor. How do we explain that? Well, I, the rich person, must have been more fit in this competition, just as my business must have succeeded because it was more fit. All right, social Darwinism, oftentimes seen as going hand in hand with laissez-faire, saying the government stay out of this, let businesses, let people compete to find out who is most fit. All right, and so that might be used to justify things like the use of child labor that will be on the rise at this time period, that we're using whatever we need as we compete in this marketplace. John D. Rockefeller, or as some people would call him, Rockefeller. All right. John D. Rockefeller, of course, making money in the oil business, using that horizontal consolidation, dominating oil refining, production of kerosene, setting the standard, if you will, for kerosene production with the Standard Oil Company. As we already mentioned, he would get those rebates from railroads, allowing him to ship his goods for cheaper, care for the poor and the impoverished in cities. All right. Let's talk about labor unions. Why are they forming at this time?
To protect the rights of the workers.
Very good. Protect the rights of the workers. Concerned about low
Low
pay,
wages and high hours.
long hours, dangerous conditions. Of course, one of the goals would be to have a day that was how long? 8-hour day. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, 8 hours for what we will. There'd be concern that during economic downturns that wages were cut and yet the jobs remained the same. You might have a concern if you had a company town and that your rents were being maintained even as your wages were cut, like in the Pullman town. Right? Some of the unions to be familiar with. We did have that National Labor Union, a briefly lived organization. That's not on your paper there. Some that would last a bit longer. You have the Knights of Labor. The Knights of Labor, of course, incorporating many different groups, skilled and unskilled workers, women, men, minority groups. With this inclusiveness, though, the Knights of Labor would not advocate what tool to change things. Violence and strikes. Right? They would oppose strikes officially, although some local members of the Knights of Labor occasionally did engage in strikes. They preferred arbitration, education, discussion as a means of achieving their goals, under the leadership of Terence Vincent Powderly. Of course, the Knights of Labor, their end is oftentimes associated with what event?
Haymarket.
Very good, the Haymarket Riot, when they are associated with the violence that occurs there, as well as some of the structural problems within the Knights of Labor, leads to their decline. The American Federation of Labor, they still exist to this day as part of something called the AFL-CIO. The American Federation of Labor deriving some strength from the fact that they only organize what group? Skilled workers. So that gave you some leverage, some power. If you went on strike, you would be more difficult to do what?
Replace.
All right. And so that is one reason why their leadership, Samuel Gompers, organized the skilled workers. We oftentimes would say they organized various craft unions. If you were skilled at a particular craft, that's who they would organize first, turning them in from oftentimes local groups into national groups. When we talked about the groups or the goals of the American Federation of Labor, we oftentimes say they were engaged in bread and butter unionism, tangible things, 8-hour day, higher wages. They also want to negotiate as a group, meaning they wanted what type of rights?
Bargaining.
collective bargaining rights. So they're pushing for that right to collectively bargain. Also pushing for a closed shop, that anyone who worked at a particular place must be a member of a union. And then we'll have the industrial workers of the world. Technically, they're outside the time frame of period 6, but I mentioned them here. They'll rise around 1905. More associated with radical ideology, socialism. We'll talk a bit more about them when we get to our role play, some of their leadership, like Big Bill Haywood discussing ideas of socialism, but I thought them worth throwing in on this list as they are kind of rising along the same time period. All right. Now, I gave you some examples of some strikes to be familiar with. What we're going to frequently find, will these strikes end in success or failure?
Failure.
Failure for the workers, at least. All right. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877. See this occur in the face of the continued economic downturn of the 1870s. As railroads are failing, they cut the wages of the workers while demanding more from them. Workers in several northeastern cities start to riot. And of course, we will see federal troops brought in to suppress those riots, to protect the property of the railroads. The Haymarket Riot, 1886, there, the McCormick Reaper Factory, workers were on strike while pushing for an 8-hour day. They would engage in some violent conflict with some scabs, some strikebreakers coming in. The police would come in, injuring some of the workers on strike. A meeting was called at the Haymarket Square in Chicago. The meeting seemed to be going well. The police arrived, though. A bomb is thrown at the police officers. Violence erupts. People are injured and killed. Those who organized the Haymarket Square meeting are arrested and sentenced to death. All right. With this association with violence and radical ideas, as some of the organizers were anarchists, this leads to a decline in the popularity of labor unions. People really not looking to support violent anarchists, even though to some extent the leadership there wrongly associated with some of that violence. Homestead Steel Strike, in this case, Andrew Carnegie's underling, Henry Clay Frick, expanding hours, cutting pay to keep the Homestead Steel plant profitable, leads his workers to go on strike. Of course, as we said, the Pinkertons are brought in. There's violent conflict there. After the Pinkertons are repelled, the state militia comes in. Pinkertons not held accountable for any of the violence. And we will also see in this case, being associated with radical ideologies hurts the Union when an anarchist by the name of Alexander Berkman attempts to kill Frick. That leads to a loss of popular support for the Homestead Steel strikers. And we'll see that strike end after 6 months without any improvement in pay or working conditions. The Pullman strike, of course, George Pullman ran his company town. Very restrictive. Again, in the 1890s, we'll see another panic. Workers' wages are cut. Rents remain the same in the company town. Workers go on strike. We'll see the American Railway Union, the ARU, encourage the strike by boycotting any Pullman cars, not touching them when they arrived at train stations. We'll see a court-ordered injunction against the strike to stop it as a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, that the disruption of mail delivery and rail travel was a restraint of trade. And that will lead to the Pullman strike being ended, and also leads to the arrest of Eugene V. Debs, who will turn to socialism. Brian?
What would it violate? I thought it was an interstate comment.
No, Sherman Antitrust. Because they engaged in restraint of trade, they would say.
Oh, because of the trust word.
Yeah. Now, this is something we talked more about in the last unit, but incorporated here as well, the notion of the New South. And we said this is the idea that the South was also undergoing somewhat change in industrial development, but certainly not on the size and scale that we would associate with the North. All right, the South will still predominantly be associated with what?
Agriculture.
Agriculture, and in particular the development of what replacement of slavery, if you will?
Oh.
Sharecropping. Very good. All right, so we'll continue to see the use of sharecropping and tenant farming in the South. All right. New systems of production, transportation enabled consolidation within agriculture, which, along with periods of instability, spurred a variety of responses from farmers. All right? What the heck does that mean? So, well, we're going to see new systems of production, new technologies, not only in the field of industry, but also in the field of agriculture.
Outstanding.
Yeah, that's in their field like farmers. All right. Transportation, of course, we see the rise of what? Railroads. All right. Consolidation within agriculture would suggest that not only are we going to see some corporate power in industry, but we're also going to see some corporate power in farming as well, which some independent farmers might have some concern about, not only the concern of railroad corporate power, but also some corporate power within farming. Periods of instability, those economic panics, certainly will hurt farmers, especially out west. You might also face the troubles with weather, wiping out your crops, making it difficult for you to pay back your debts. All right, so mechanization leads to a decline in food prices. Why is that? Mechanization might allow you to do what?
Less workers, more food.
All right, increased production, which in the result declines in the value that you might get for your crops. All right, things like the McCormick Reaper, the John Deere steel plow. All right. Yes. If I weren't on videotape right now, I might make some joke about John Deere being just a clothing line in Nassau, but no, they also engage in some. Oh, that's the oh, geez. All right, so see things like barbed wire. All right, barbed wire, moving their head of cattle through various areas. But as we start to see barbed wire crisscross the Great Plains, that's going to stop the cowboys. We're going to start to see cattle barons develop, controlling water supply in large fields of cattle. All right, we'll see again the rise of these farmers out west. Farm organizations, you can think about the Grange forming cooperatives, pooling resources, all right, in order to cut costs. We can start to see farmers form political groups like the Farmers Alliance. And perhaps among the most notable groups would be the rise of the People's Party, also known as the Populist Party. As we talk about these groups, we suggest there's a few things key to remember. One issue would be monetary policy. Farmers generally favoring an inflationary policy of doing what? Bimetallism. Coining both, watch out, Eric, you're about to get your head. Yeah. Encouraging bimetallism, the coining of both silver and gold. All right. Perhaps that famously culminating in William Jennings Bryan's speech called the Cross of Gold. All right. We would also see farmers concerned about the power of what industry? Railroads. All right. Leading to cases like Munville, Illinois, that allowed for states to regulate companies for the benefit of the public, including railroads. Then, of course, we'll see the federal government step in with the Interstate Commerce Act, creating the Interstate Commerce Commission. But as we said, the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, largely what we'd say toothless, or ineffective in its attempts to regulate railroads during its first years of existence. We'll see the Populist Party take on other issues as well, all right, encouraging that not only regulation of railroads and bimetallism, but increasing the power of the people, promoting ideas of direct election of senators, initiatives, referendum, trying to deal with that unequal distribution of wealth by having a income tax or a graduated income tax, taxing wealthy individuals at a higher rate. And we see them attempt to appeal to workers with things like the 8-hour day or outlawing the use of the Pinkertons. And as I said before, we'll see a lot of the populist ideas come to fruition during the Progressive era. All right. Migrations that accompany industrialization transform both urban and rural areas of the United States and cause dramatic social and cultural changes. Well, migrations, we can think of that as occurring internally and externally. All right. Externally, we'll see a rise of immigration. Especially, we'll see what we call the new immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe in the period after 1890. We'd see, of course, immigrants from Asia, places like China, helping to construct the Transcontinental Railroad. And we'd see some internal migrations as well. We could think of African Americans leaving the South. They were called the exodusters on their exodus out of the land of slavery to hopefully a promised land out west, as well as other people moving from rural areas to cities. And of course, as we have this influx of people, we talk about America as a melting pot. Different ideas are brought in, different religions, different creeds. And so certainly that's going to lead to a change in some of our cities. All right. We will see a trend of urbanization at this time. Cities are growing quickly, putting a great deal of strain on city resources. We can think of disasters like the Great Chicago Fire, outbreaks of disease like yellow fever, Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, though that will occur in 1911, as cities really are not prepared always to meet the changes that are occurring at this time. Immigration, again, those new immigrants, they're the ones coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. Immigration from Asia. Eugenics, of course, the belief that some groups are what? Superior to others. Particularly, it would be popular to believe that those from Northern and Western Europe were superior to those from Southern and Eastern Europe. But also, this rise of nativism can relate to those new immigrants that are different. People from Italy were Catholics. Those coming from Eastern Europe were Jews. And then you have people from Asia coming over with a totally different culture, unfamiliar to those from Europe, leading to some resentment there. Perhaps not surprising that our earliest immigration policies will be quite racist. Right? We'll have the Chinese Exclusion Act. We'll pick that group of people, say that they are to be excluded from the United States. And again, when we think about nativism, we'll think of the same arguments that people bring up today. Two different groups, different religions being looked down upon, as well as competition for jobs. Push and pull factors. I think these are pretty straightforward. Push factors make you want to leave a place. Pull factors make you want to come to a place. So if I'm a Jewish family in Russia facing a pogrom, that might make me say, boy, I would like to leave this place where I get attacked for my faith and to go to America where there's religious freedom. Or perhaps there's a depression in Italy. I will want to go to America where these streets are paved with gold, after all. And we can see this difference in immigration, even how people were received. Of course, in New York City of Ellis Island, the Golden Door, welcoming people, as there's really not too many immigration restrictions from Europe. And then, of course, on the West Coast, you'll have Angel Island, the guardian of the Western Gate, trying to bar immigrants coming in from Asia, especially after we have that Chinese Exclusion Act and the Gentleman's Agreement later on with Japan. Internal migration, I mentioned the exodusters already. African Americans leaving the South and moving west, and we would have other people moving from rural areas to urban areas. In the ghetto. Elvis. All right. Ghettos. Ethnic enclaves, think your Little Italy, your Chinatown. You'd have particular groups living near those who are from the same country. And this still happens to this day. You'll have particular areas where you might have Ukrainians and Russians and congregate together because you want to be near those who you are familiar with. Of course, these tended to be areas of poverty, and with poverty oftentimes comes what other problem? Violence and crime, all right? And this goes back to that eugenics idea where people see all these immigrants have all this crime and problem. It's not poverty, it must be their genetic structure, all right? We'll see public education popular as a way of doing what?
What?
Public education as a way of
Giving full more power.
getting them ready to work at the factories. Boy, you must have been reading that socialist Howard Zinn. As well as Americanizing them, right?
Yes.
Turning those immigrants from Europe into good Americans. Political machines developed in American cities. All right, you could think of the Tammany Ring in New York City, Boss Tweed. People part of the Tammany Ring like George Washington Plunkett. I've seen my opportunities and I took them. Oftentimes doing favors for immigrants, for the poor families of that area in return for getting their votes. So you can maintain your power, take bribes, get kickbacks, use that inside information. I was reading a great thing about Plunkett. We had the one thing we read. There's all sorts of discussions that he would have. This idea that he did all these favors. If he saw someone's house burned down, he didn't refer them to a charity. He found them a place to live. He would find people jobs. And of course, when it came November, he was expecting their votes to maintain his power. Of course, even in beautiful Smallbany, right down the road, Erastus Corning, I looked it up, 41 years he was mayor. All right, you don't remain mayor for 41 years unless there's a political machine in place. You're doing favors for people, you're getting their votes.
How does that math work out? 41, he died? Oh.
All right.
Could have been 42 floors on that building.
Now, corporate structure leading to expanding middle class, say women entering the workforce, increased education for all Americans, including women, and with that middle class, we will see increased leisure, all right, leading to the rise of popular sports, the vaudeville theater, Nickelodeons, as people have time to enjoy these new consumer goods that are available to them. Even in cities, we'll see the rise of the parks movement, as you can go to Central Park now, enjoy a picnic all right, on your day off.
There's too many tools.
All right. Immigrants moving west in search of land, economic opportunity, provoking competition, and violent conflict. So, migrants, of course, we have the government encouraging migration with what act? The Homestead Act. And other people moving out west, take part in things like the gold rush. We always think of California, but we'll find gold and silver in Colorado and the Dakotas. We'll see the rise of some boom towns. People will enjoy this easy access to gold and silver for some time. And sometimes those boom towns disappear into ghost towns. We will see, of course, the competition with who? Perhaps between immigrants, between the people of Mexican descent that may have been living there, and also with the Native Americans. Conflict between different ethnic groups moving out west, whether that be the Chinese and other people of European descent, or even between European peoples. Right? The Transcontinental Railroad certainly encourages that movement westward. People will first oftentimes take advantage of mineral wealth, finding silver and gold in places like Pikes Peak, Colorado, Black Hills of South Dakota. Of course, oftentimes this will lead to a violation of a treaty. All right, we'd have agreements. Hey, we're not going to go to that area of Colorado. Whoops, we found some gold there. Settlers are going to move in. We're going to promise them the Fort Laramie Treaty. That area of South Dakota is yours forever. Whoops, we found gold there. We're going to start moving in there.
It's yours
all
until
right?
we want it.
Exactly.
So it's a bank.
Not exactly. That's not how. Anyways. All right. So we're going to see frequent violations of treaties might lead people to write a book called A Century of Dishonor by Helen Hunt Jackson, talking about these constant violation of treaties over the course of American history. There. All right. We've talked about the Homestead Act. Now, among the most significant ways of reducing Native Americans to a state of dependence upon the federal government would be the killing of the buffalo. As we take away this source of food, as this source of a variety of resources, all right, Native Americans increasingly have no reason to leave the reservation, because if they had, it would be to hunt the buffalo. All right, so that certainly is going to be one of the more effective ways of subduing Native Americans, is reducing the buffalo to near extinction. And as we read that little blurb in class there, that also gives us some evidence of some of the changing role of other racial groups, all right, like the buffalo soldiers, predominantly African Americans. All right. Good luck tomorrow, guys.
Thank you.
The reservation system, of course, the idea is that we're going to place Native Americans on a restricted area. Fort Laramie Treaty, part of that effort, but also an example of something that will be violated, leading to conflict. This member of the Sioux tribe refusing to remain on that land. Get into some violent conflict. We'll have events like Custer's Last Stand, the Battle of Little Bighorn. And of course, there's going to be violence on both sides. We have the Battle of Little Bighorn. We'll have massacres like the Sand Creek Massacre, Massacre of Wounded Knee. Now, one effort would be to have Native Americans live on reservations. Not all Native Americans want to do that, especially if reservations were violated, like Chief Joseph trying to flee the Napoleon of Indians, as they called him, trying to resist being pushed onto a particular area of land. Of course, he will eventually surrender. We also had the effort to get Native Americans to do what?
Americanize.
Americanize or assimilate. All right, the Dawes Severalty Act, or the Dawes Allotment Act. Either way you see it, it's the same thing. The idea is we're going to make Native Americans into what?
Americans.
White farmers, if you will. All right, well, they'll be given the treat of citizenship if they agree to break away from their tribe. All right, we can remember Mr. Pratt there, founder of the Carlisle School, saying that we would kill the Indian but save the man. All right, part of this idea of taking Native Americans from their families and assimilating them in these schools. Other reformers, Helen Hunt Jackson, or Century Dishonor, she too would talk about citizenship, but also the importance of not breaking treaties anymore if we're going to expect peaceful relations with Native Americans. All these different massacres. That's the Sand Creek Massacre, Ghost Dance, last, I don't know if you can call it resistance, but certainly a religious development on the part of Native Americans as they see themselves subdued. Some hope that a great spirit will come to remove white Americans from the land, bring back the buffalo. Leads to fear, leads to the battle or the massacre at Wounded Knee. All right, that's out of chronological order. That came in the 1870s. But that's battle or the massacre at Wounded Knee, kind of like the end of any even perceived Native American resistance of any sort on the Great Plains. New cultural and intellectual movements, public reform efforts, political debates over economics and social policies. Now this, to some extent, we did not get to yet, these cultural and intellectual movements. Some that we have talked about, social Darwinism, largely associated with Spencer and Carnegie. The idea that in our capitalist system, we should follow laissez-faire, let people compete, let businesses compete, who's ever most fit will rise to the top. People like Horatio Alger, I mentioned him, writing those rags to riches stories, kind of help you support that idea that if you just work hard, if you're just honest, you too will achieve great success. All right. Andrew Carnegie with his Gospel of Wealth also encouraging this idea. Work hard, make a lot of money. YMCA, or the Salvation Army, that's part of this social gospel and religious movement that also seeks, though, perhaps even more importantly to them, to take care of your worldly needs, especially those living in poverty. All right, social changes, political debates over citizenship, corruption, and the proper relation between business and government. We saw some continued sectional tensions. We saw some debate over protectionism, especially as America's businesses grow. Are these tariffs protecting some businesses at the expense of farmers or the consumer? All right. We'll see debates over monetary policy, particularly those in the agrarian reform movement, pushing for free silver and bimetallism or even greenbackism, while those more conservative banking elements associated with the gold standard that we've been talking about the last couple of days. Government corruption, of course, we remember Grant's era of good stealings. We'll see corruption continue into this time period at a variety of levels of governments, those local political machines, even at the federal and state level, calling for reform of civil service. We'll see the Pendleton Civil Service Act passed after the death of Garfield.
Yeah.
Garfield. All right, so.
You tried.
All right, we talked about populist reforms. We talked about women joining the workforce. Colleges for women, you can think of, what is it, Seven Sisters. Girls' schools, no longer. All of them girls' schools, places like Vassar. Everyone is so smug that goes there. Anyone from Vassar watching this, you're so smug. Anyways, all right.
No discrimination, though.
Even if it's, I hope I spelled it wrong, Vassar. All right, now. I did that deliberately. No. I went to Marist. It's down the street from Vassar.
Yeah, we know.
Anyways. When I'm not on camera sometime, I'll talk about Vassar. All right, now, Jane Addams, she is someone you absolutely need to know.
Who?
Jane Addams. She would develop something known as the Settlement House movement in America. The Settlement House movement, her house was known as Hull House. Very good. This would be a place like a community center. All right. Oftentimes in some of the rougher areas, hers was in Chicago, where you provided lessons in English, cultural experiences, whatever that community needed, you would attempt to provide it. And again, Jane Addams, among the college-educated, middle-class women that are really the leaders of this movement. Who's the guy who took pictures of those living in poverty to draw attention?
Jacob Reese.
Jacob Reese in his book, How the Other Half Lives. Very good. All right, so those are some of the efforts along the social gospel movement trying to improve the life of the poor. This we have not talked about. I actually prefer to talk about this when we get to the, we're kind of in the progressive era, but we're talking more particularly about the progressive era. Plessy v. Ferguson, of course, is one of those terrible court cases in American history. This is the one that established the doctrine of separate but equal. Allows for Jim Crow laws to become the law of the land. And we'll see different response to this. Booker T. Washington is someone we'll talk more about later on, encouraging African Americans to pursue vocational education, pursue economic development, and to some extent accept discrimination at this time period. The reason I like to talk more about this stuff is when we get to the progressive era, we'll see all these reforms coming to fruition, but African Americans largely left out of those reforms, so I prefer to talk about that there. So that's why we have talked about that yet, but technically it's in period 6. All right, woo! Feel like I'm on a whirlwind here.
Wow, that was just under.
Now, let me take a look-see here.
That's why I talked.
All right, so you guys, make sure you're familiar with the Populist Party. Understand some of those changes of businesses, some of the ideas associated with capitalism, like social Darwinism, laissez-faire, some of the problems facing society this time period. Again, well, that one you'll probably figure out.
What are we gonna figure out?
No, I can't tell you. I think about Native Americans or general policies there of either reservations, assimilation, and killing the buffalo. Again, think about some changes in business that attempt to reduce competition, trusts, monopolies, vertical consolidation. Immigration, the development of cities, some of the problems in cities, that rise of immigration. And then, yeah, this one hopefully you'll figure out. And as I said, the short answer, think concerns of labor, goals of labor unions, and some of the actions they took. That's as far as I'm going to go on that hint there. What's your problem, Allie? All right, Gutter Snipe Productions. You got to send a link to the Google Classroom? Yeah.
Even